Welcome back to Football Weather. Galen, Clavio, and Matt Blaszka joining you. It is the 21st of December. Matt, it's the first official day of winter, which means we're at the height of football weather season. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's hard to really think of football weather when it's going to be in the 60s today. But if you watch some of those games yesterday, certainly you feel like it's we're hitting the playoffs here. If you're an NFL fan, playoffs are also there. We had our Montana State FCS going to the championship game in a couple weeks here. So awesome time of year for football as we get down to the nitty gritty of the season.
Yeah, congrats to the Montana State Bobcats, who that was one of the weirder games I think I've watched in football this year, where they came out, pounced on Montana. Then Montana just started ripping off touchdown drives, gets all the way back, I think takes the lead. And then Montana State comes back and rips off like 3 touchdowns, and suddenly it's over again. It was hard to keep track of, but good job by Montana State, and a special congratulations to Illinois State as they travel to Philadelphia and knock off Villanova handily. That's an Illinois State team that nobody saw this coming from, and my congrats to them on navigating what was a pretty difficult bracket, and an unseeded team getting to the championship in FCS is always fun to see.
4 straight road wins, and they'll go to Nashville here. I believe it's on January 5th. I think they play that Monday night. So that's if you're in the area, I think you're going to see a great game. Obviously, you're having a really big underdog, but they did beat North Dakota State a couple weeks ago. If you're an FCS fan, if you're any football fan, get down there for that Monday night game.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. It's been great football in the FCS playoffs. I've probably watched more of that this year than I ever have. So there we go. And of course, we had some Group of 5 controversy in big air quotes from yesterday, but we've got 4 playoff games that have already taken place now that we can talk about. We've got some coaching search thoughts as that's still going on, and there was some big news related to that yesterday. And then we'll, of course, preview what we now know will be the quarterfinal games. Those are set, and those are happening not too long from now. You're talking about 10 days until we get to the Cotton Bowl. So all of that coming up here on Football Weather. First, just a quick reminder, we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, and an on-the-ball design team who was ready to roll as soon as we got these matchups set for the quarterfinal. If you are a fan of any of these teams, you now have bowl-specific apparel that has been printed. There's Cotton Bowl stuff, there's Orange Bowl stuff, there's Rose Bowl stuff, there's Sugar Bowl stuff, featuring the matchups of the teams that are in them. So head on over to Home Field Apparel and pick up one of those or more of them, perhaps. I think there were like 3 per collection. You can use the code. Use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. And you can also, while you're there, browse through the shop and see what else is out there as Home Field continues to pump a significant amount of new designs for every team that's in the playoffs currently. So again, homefieldapparel.com. Follow them on social media. All right, Matt, let's dive into it. 4 games over the course of a day and a half, basically, a little bit less than that. Let's start with the first game. We talked about this one a lot last night on our live collaborative podcast with myself and Rhett Lewis from the Big Red Carpet. Alabama, Oklahoma took place on Friday night, and this was a game that was an odd one, to say the least, which we thought it might be. Alabama had lost to Oklahoma last month. They did not look very good against Georgia in the SEC title game. A lot of people were picking Oklahoma. The line swung to Oklahoma right before the game by a pretty significant margin. I mean, I think Oklahoma was -2 when it started, and they looked like they were going to beat Alabama by 20 or more as they take a 17-0 lead. And then Alabama comes back in the second half and wins handily by 10. What were your overall impressions of this game?
I think we were texting. It was like the inverse of the game that happened about a month ago. It was 17-0 Oklahoma. And Kirk even called this out when they were on that 4th and goal. They scored that touchdown. And you're like, okay, here comes Alabama. But Ty Simpson was making some good throws. They finally got the offense going. But I really thought like the block punt really changed that game, or whatever you want to call that, dropped punt. Because if that drop punt, because if that gets off, you're not going to have that pick at the end of the half most likely. And that totally flipped it because they scored there. I know they only get a field goal. And there was about 2 minutes to go, and Mateer throws a terrible pick, and then you're all of a sudden it's 17-17 going in a half, and you have no momentum. And it just seemed like once we got to that point, Oklahoma stopped moving the ball. Like, it was very much every game we've seen the last, I don't know, month with Oklahoma. They would score just enough points to win, and the offense just really couldn't move the ball. And that's what happened. I mean, from a fan of either team, you really thought this was going to be a low scoring game, and it didn't turn out that way. But really, once Alabama got rolling, they dominated on both sides of the ball. They started sacking material or stopping the run. Alabama still couldn't run the ball. They really were one-dimensional, but kudos to Ty Simpson for throwing some really nice balls. If his receivers caught some more balls, this could have been a bigger blowout. But I was really impressed, quote unquote, with Alabama, I guess, to how they came back, being down 17-0, and really, handling the game in the second half. You never really were in doubt that Oklahoma was going to come back, even though they got back to 3, because Alabama just was really rolling once they got going in the second half. So Alabama, kudos. We'll see them here in a couple weeks. But it really was an odd game to watch because Oklahoma just disintegrated, it seemed like.
Yeah, and just statistically, it was a very odd game offensively. Oklahoma threw for over 300 yards in this game, but couldn't really get it done when they needed to. They were a dropped touchdown pass away from this being 24-0 at one point, and then it just flipped completely. It's hard to really get a read on, okay, is Alabama back? Is this the Alabama that beat Georgia earlier in the year? Is this the Alabama that handled Vanderbilt at home? Or is this the Alabama that, frankly, struggled down the stretch? This was actually Alabama's first game where they scored 30 or more points since mid-October, which is kind of wild to think about. And the one game they got close in that stretch to scoring 30 was against South Carolina, a game they had to come back at the end of the game on a fourth quarter drive to even get the 29 points that they ended up with in that game. But, they've not been that impressive offensively. This was more impressive offensively. I still come back to try to figure out exactly, how good and how together and how able is this Alabama team to play a full 4 quarters against the team that isn't shooting itself in the foot actively like Oklahoma was in this game. Alabama's got a ton of talent. Ty Simpson looked much better. He didn't look injured. He'd had some great throws. He also had some throws where you're like, wow, if you can get pressure on him in the pocket, that's some problems for him. And that was probably the biggest surprise and maybe the greatest sign of hope for Alabama as they face Indiana in the next round, is that their offensive line was pretty much able to keep him clean in the second half. And that will be something that they'll have to do in this Rose Bowl matchup, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. So Alabama, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I'm just curious, and I mean, I know we'll get to that. We'll talk about the game here a little bit. They ran 25 times for 28 yards. And if you take out that 30-yard run, right, that they had at some point in the third quarter, they ran for negative yards for the second straight game. And I just don't know how you can keep that up,
right,
playing, against Indiana, or if they happen to win that game as well. Like, you can't keep that up for 4 rounds. So they're going to figure out how to run the ball, because it's not just, you can't rely on Ty Simpson to just keep going back there and chucking it for the next 3 rounds if they keep going.
And you can't rely on the other team shooting themselves in the foot. That's the thing. I mean, we'll look back at this and we'll say Oklahoma had 1 turnover, but they really had 2 turnovers. You have to count that drop punt as what was the turnover. And that's, again, like you said, it's not sustainable. On the flip side, I think it's interesting how easily they were able to take away Oklahoma's running attack in this game, because as bad as Alabama ran the ball, Oklahoma ran the ball just as poorly, where they ended up with 1.7 yards per carry. They had 55 total yards, and they had no explosives. I mean, their longest run from scrimmage the whole game was 11 yards, and that was a John Mateer scramble. So a lot of interesting questions about how this matchup looks. Both teams were able to get to the other's quarterback. You had a combined 9 sacks in this game. You had a combined 14 tackles for loss in this game. So it's going to be interesting watching Alabama retool. And this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of the talent evaluations. All we hear from SEC people is how tough the SEC is, how much more talent there is, and how even Big Ten teams, with the exception of Ohio State, just simply can't compare. We're going to see that put to the test. I'm not saying I agree with those things, but we're going to see that put to the test in Pasadena on January 1st. So,
I can't really talk about that in a little bit, but you're right. I mean, it's a really fun matchup when you talk about the most well-coached team versus maybe the most talented team or talent composite rankings or whatever in the country. It's going to be a really fun game. I know we'll talk about it here in a little bit. So I'm excited for that one.
Texas A&M and Miami. This was not a game for the ages. And it's been interesting watching the consensus coalesce around the idea that this was a defensive masterpiece by Miami. It was clearly a very impressive showing on the road by Miami's defense, but Miami and Texas A&M just looked like they neither trusted themselves nor really had any good idea of how to score in this game. Miami ends up putting a drive together at the end of the game that allows them to go down the field, score a touchdown, and then A&M out of the blue suddenly figures it out as well, drives all the way down, throws an interception on what was in effect the last competitive play of the game, under a minute in the fourth quarter. Miami ends up winning on the road 10-3. Where would you like to start with this one, Matt? That we could go all over the place with it.
Yeah. I think my favorite stat is Texas A&M was a 3.5 point favorite and they only scored 3 points. But it was a tough watch. I mean, if you're a football fan, I don't mind defensive struggles, but this was not that. It was both teams shooting themselves in the foot. It felt like when they got it going or they moved, they missed a field goal, or there was an interception. It was just both teams looked off. I was not impressed with either team. And it's interesting because we talked about this last week during our preview pod with A&M. Like, what A&M is going to show up? Is it the A&M we've been watching for the last month when they almost lost to South Carolina, then got beat by Texas? And that's the team that we saw, right? They didn't beat any of the top teams. They struggled down the stretch, and it showed. Like it showed that they were not really primed for this type of big game. Where Miami has been on the ropes for the entire season. I know, again, it was only 10-3, but you can see that they came in, they played a really good defensive game. But offensively, they were just not moving the ball until that was their only drive. That one drive is it. I mean, that was 75 of their 278 yards. So I'm curious how
and 56 of those yards came on one run by Mark Fletcher Jr. Yes.
Yeah. And so like you obviously just have to win the game at this time of year, but that effort and Carson Beck needs to be better if they're going to have any opportunity to be Ohio State. That's for sure. But again, I mean, if you have a good defense like they do, they should have a competitive game against Ohio State. So I guess, from that standpoint, they are right on par in terms of that type of game. But we'll see. I mean, it was a really tough watch for 50. Well, really the whole game. I'm not giving them any credit for the last drive, but it was a slog of a game to watch if you're a football fan.
Well, and there were some interesting weather conditions. Obviously, you had wind that was creating problems for the kickers. And then you'd have the kickers overcompensating, which created more issues. There was one of those cycles that just never settled in a good spot. And I think there's a lot of questions about Miami offensively. A&M's defense was good. We knew that coming in. Carson Beck had a really subpar game, and they're really fortunate that Fletcher breaks that run, because I don't know if we may still be in overtime in that game right now with neither team able to kick a field goal. We're in overtime 28 at this point when we're recording. But so I'll say this about A&M, and then I'll say one thing about Miami. On the A&M front, we had questions about A&M all year, and it felt like they had been given so much deference because of beating Notre Dame on the road earlier on in the season. And you look at the rest of their results, and they really didn't beat teams that were good the rest of the way. We talked about this. They were getting first place votes in mid-November, if people can remember that. And then they had the bad game against South Carolina that they win. They lose the game against Texas, and now this is the way that their season closes. It makes you reevaluate what you thought you knew, or what the conventional wisdom was about Texas A&M throughout the course of the season. That's not to take anything away from Miami, because going into that environment, as loud as that stadium can get, was no small feat. And I think with Miami, what I look at is the one thing about Miami's defense that differentiates them from a lot of other teams, and what might give them at least a puncher's chance against Ohio State, is how much havoc their front seven causes to the opposition. Taylor Lehman had a good tweet about this, where the amount of havoc, tackles for loss and sacks and things like that, and pressures and hurries that get get the Miami gets out of their line. That's right up there with what you see out of Texas Tech, what you see out of Indiana. And those have been the teams that have been able to disrupt the opposition's quarterback as much. That's essentially what Indiana did to win a low-scoring game against Ohio State on a neutral field, it's going to be a similar scenario to Miami.
Yeah.
The question is, can Carson Beck get it together? I mean, that was, as you said, not a good performance, throws for only 103 yards on 14 completions. He was even technically given a touchdown pass on that
little
jet
shovel pass
from Tony, which that is flattering Carson Beck very much in that, because that was all Malachi Tony. That ball didn't even get 3 feet out of the pocket. So that's I don't think Miami's going to be able to compare if they play like this, but they do have the talent assemblage. If they play that way defensively and then add some offense to it, it might be an interesting game in the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, so like as you said, like they're going to have to play a very similar type defensive game. Though I mean, I assume they'll watch the Indiana tape here to really see what Indiana did, because that was the one team, obviously the one team Ohio State really played well. It's interesting because like you look at all these stats for Miami's 28 rushing yards for 175 yards, but like you said, they had those 2 big rushes at the end of in the fourth quarter. They had the really big one that was for 50 some yards, and so it concerns me that if they don't, if Carson Beck can't just play better, right, they're going to be in trouble regardless, because it doesn't matter how well you run the ball. They're going to just, stop the receivers or stop back. And it's not going to matter.
It's the exact inverse of what you said about Alabama. If you can't throw the ball, and you're relying entirely on your run, the key is you can't be one-dimensional offensively and get very far in the playoff. And both of those teams are facing that issue right now. And I don't think it's just down to, they played good defenses.
Yeah, it's just their offense has been, it's just stagnant. And obviously, they haven't had a tough competition game in a while, Miami. And so maybe this was just getting off the mat. They haven't played in 3 weeks. Maybe that's part of it. And so it's going to be interesting to see, especially Ohio State. They're going to have a month off, like how they are going to be well rested for a Miami team who just played. But hopefully if I'm Miami, I am just throwing this one away and just preparing for to restart this, because this was really bad offensively.
Let's jump to the second game yesterday. The third game played overall. This is probably the one we'll spend the least amount of time on. Ole Miss 41, Tulane 10. The big question in this, there were 2. A, could Tulane be more competitive than they were in the game they played against Ole Miss earlier this year? They were not. And B, how does Ole Miss respond to a new head coach, to putting the Lane Kiffin drama behind them? So what was your answer to that question?
Yeah. I mean, they came out, the offense, you could tell they were pumped up, right? They scored those 14 quick points in the first, 5 minutes of the game. It looked really good. I mean, they looked really, really solid. And obviously, they're playing a Tulane team. They've already beat 45-10 early in the year. But I think we need to see that just to be, more confident in Ole Miss. I'm not sure if this changes my perception of, can Ole Miss make a deep run? They are probably they're probably the dark horse of the entire field that's really left in this. But from a standpoint, they were up 41-3 in this game. They dominated. They forced turnovers. Tulane moved the ball a little bit in the first half. If they didn't shoot themselves in the foot, maybe, it's a little closer at some point. I mean, they still pull away and they probably still win. But a really good performance. I really like Golding, man. He just lets it rip. I mean, he just comes to the press conference, says whatever he wants. He does not shy away from that. He definitely has not had his PR school yet. But, they're a fun team. I'm curious. They've already played Georgia once. They played an offensive game against them. There was no punts in that game until the fourth quarter. So they played that game. It's tough to beat a team twice. So I guess we'll talk about that a little bit. But Ole Miss puts themselves in a really good spot now that they've got over this first hump and heads to go play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's an interesting matchup from the standpoint that Ole Miss, and we'll talk about it at the tail end of the show, already played Georgia pretty tough earlier this year. And I think for this game, Ole Miss needed to get some early confidence and then just have a game where they didn't worry about things so that they could fully get into the mental and emotional era that they're in right now. It's a big accomplishment to win a playoff game. And even though it was against a team that clearly has bad matchup problems against Ole Miss, there were plenty of opportunities for Ole Miss not to play well in this game. They didn't play well in the Egg Bowl. And I was honestly expecting a performance kind of like that, where they were scuffling a bit, and it just really didn't happen in this one. And you look down the list. Yeah, Retzlaff ended up throwing for 306 yards, but as you said, a lot of that was essentially kind of empty calories worth of yards because Ole Miss was able to stop them from doing anything once they got into plus territory. 497 total yards of offense for Ole Miss in this game, 10.2 yards per pass, 151 yards rushing, almost mistake-free game. They only had one penalty in this game. They only had one turnover in this game. This was the type of performance that you can really look back on and say, guys, let's just keep doing this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very helpful for a team that needed some identity reestablishment going into the playoff. So it's exactly the performance that we thought we would likely get and the result that we'd likely get out of this one. So we'll just move forward to the final game of the day, which kind of went the way we thought it would and then didn't at the end. Oregon 51, James Madison 34. James Madison fans learning what Indiana fans learned last year, which is that it doesn't matter what you do in a game unless it happens during the time period where people on Twitter are demanding to be entertained. James Madison was getting blown away in the first half of this game. It was a clear mismatch with Oregon just being able to do whatever they wanted on offense. And then Oregon took their foot off the gas, and James Madison never did. And while they were never a serious threat to win this game, the fact that they, A, got it to where they covered the spread, and B, racked up 509 yards of offense on an Oregon defense that's pretty darn good. I think we got to tip our caps to James Madison and say that Oregon's lucky there wasn't a fifth quarter in this one, because if they'd kept playing, I don't know how it would have gone.
Yeah, I turned it off at 48-13 or whatever the score was. I was one of those Oregon bettors, so yeah, thanks for that, guys. I mean, it just took. I watched the final drives. I saw it was close. 9 plays, 99 yards to cover the spread. Congrats, that's great. I mean, it was awesome.
It's tremendous. Well, and it wasn't even like Oregon pulled all their starters. I mean, they pulled some of them, but it shows that there's. I mean, look, so much of what happened in this game was essentially down to two things. James Madison could not measure up physically in terms of their defense versus Oregon's offense. They did measure up, I thought, fairly well in terms of their offense versus Oregon's defense. And they ran the ball well. They threw the ball better than I thought they would. They emptied the clip in terms of the play calling in the first half, but they just shot themselves in the foot so many times with penalties, 13 penalties, 113 yards. Now, that said, they didn't turn the ball over. They couldn't finish a lot of what they did execution-wise. And Oregon deserves a ton of credit for that.
I appreciate what Bob Chesney said too. He goes, "Hey, listen, we had, like you said, we had the opportunities. We made mistakes. I'm not saying if we would have won the game, but we would have made it maybe a little bit, maybe made it closer. We just don't have the athletes to have any mistakes. You know, if you're going to win a game or be competitive in a game like this, you have to be mistake free, and they just weren't. I mean, that's just the end of it for them. And kudos for them. They kept playing. They didn't stop playing. We'll talk about the G5 here thing in a second. But Oregon is really good. Like they are a top 5, top 3. I mean, they're going to be a really tough out in this turn and in this bracket next week against Texas A&M or Texas Tech. Sorry, Texas Tech.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Texas Tech. And so like Oregon needed this too. After we said this on the last spot, Oregon needed this after what happened to them last year in the Rose Bowl to Ohio State. Just to play the best game they can play. I know Lanning was not happy at the end because of the way it finished, but the way they started, you're like, this team can win the national championship. I mean, they were really impressive moving the ball.
Yeah. I mean, it might be the ending that Lanning needed, because you coast in a game like that and maybe you don't have the same level of intensity coming out for the next game, and they're going to need that against Texas Tech, whose defense is physically capable of matching up with Oregon offensively. But to be able to go into the locker room after winning comfortably and say, guys, that wasn't good enough. Like, that effort was not good enough. There was a comment from one of the Oregon players post-game who said, normally there's music playing in the locker room after the game. There was no music in this one. It felt like they lost. To some degree, that's what you want going into the next round, because you got to get yourself refocused. It's not a whole lot different from Curt Cignetti talking on the podium at the Big Ten championship game about how he's got to get his team to forget this and refocus on the next one. So that will be a fascinating matchup, Oregon versus Texas Tech. We'll talk about that here in a couple of minutes. Before we do that, we do need to talk through this more discourse. Matt, there's always discourse that we have to talk about with this. We had a lot of complaints coming into the week about the group of 5 teams having 2 spots. Of course, I think people need to realize that's the rules. That's how it's set up. And the only reason we had 2 group of 5 teams in the playoff was because the ACC couldn't get their stuff together and put themselves in a position where they had a 8-5 conference champion that was so far down in the rankings versus either James Madison or Tulane that you couldn't put them in according to the rules. You got to acknowledge that neither of those games was competitive, but as many people pointed out today, we have a long history of non-competitive games in the playoff, even dating back to the 4-team playoff, almost all of those involving power conference teams. And James Madison last night ended up losing by fewer points than Tennessee or SMU did last year in the first round of the playoff. So this is the kind of noise that we hear almost every year. There's always something that's being complained about. It just felt like this particular set of arguments it's just not very interesting. It doesn't do a whole lot to engender interest or excitement about the playoff. It's almost like, why even watch these games? And then you turn around and simultaneously are wondering why you don't have higher levels of revenue coming in from advertising dollars. Like there are some interesting elements of these games. Not all these games are necessarily going to be close, but the idea that it's not good to have any group of 5 teams in the playoff kind of misses the larger point about why it would be good to have more people interested in the playoff, not just the people that root for the biggest brands.
If you're gonna, if you're a football fan, I think you're aware that both these teams were a step down, right? I don't think that's really shouldn't be the discourse. Discourse we should be celebrating these teams that had a really good season. They didn't. This is not their fault. Let's look at JMU. They were 11-1. Tulane was 10-2, 11-2. They had some good wins. Like, let's celebrate these teams. Tulane beat Duke. People were clamoring for Duke to be in this playoff yesterday because Tulane was losing. Tulane beat them on the field. Like, that actually happened. So let's not act like this would have been completely different if Duke was in this tournament, right? It's really disingenuous. It was disingenuous to even what Ari Wasserman, like, this is a safety issue. It's not a safety issue. They both play FBS football. It's not like they're playing Division III school.
It was Bud Elliott, but yes.
Bud Elliott, come on. What are we doing here? Yeah. Sorry, Ari. I don't want to get
Ari's had plenty of bad takes. I just want to make sure we assign the bad takes to the right people.
Yeah, it's like, come on. Like, I kept saying, look, again, I repost this, and a lot of people retweeted it now. Like, some of these scores, like TCU lost by 50 in the national championship game. The Chiefs were down by 35 in the Super Bowl last year. All right, should we just not play that game? Like, come on. Like, these things happen. Let's actually like celebrate these teams. Like, the national media needs to do a better job. There's 60 plus teams that are not in the Power Four that deserve an opportunity to play in this tournament. Are they likely to win? No. But for that one time, we might get that FDU moment. We might get something of that. That's going to happen at some point, and it's going to be great for the sport. We can't just keep saying, oh, we have this group too. They don't deserve a chance to play in this tournament. That's not fair. It's stupid for the sport, and you want to grow this game. And we're not the ones that create these blown up conferences. This is their fault, right? For this type of stuff. And if you really want to blame somebody, blame the ACC for their tiebreakers for having 2 of these teams in. That's where really this comes down to. And that's obviously going to be fixed for next year as they've now make sure that those 4 conferences have, and it was, posted 18 months ago, those 4 conferences will have an automatic bid. But can we just stop the discourse that these teams didn't deserve this opportunity? We just stop.
It's there's so much of the arguments around this miss, I think, a lot of larger points, which I've talked about a couple of times on this show. I've talked about them on the other one. It's not every game is competitive in football playoffs, high school level, NFL. How many blowouts have we watched in NFL playoff games over the years? It happens. Like, you're not always going to have a situation where everybody is on the same level, but you also do get those circumstances where you have teams that are not necessarily playing at their best. And we have seen that occasionally, even involving group of 5 teams in regular bowl games. We saw USC lose to Tulane a couple of years ago. It's not necessarily that it's going to happen every single time. But again, if it's the blowouts that last year it was, Indiana didn't belong because they got blown out, lost by 10, but got blown out versus Notre Dame. And those arguments weren't being made about Tennessee not deserving to be in, even though they lost by a much wider margin. It's less about we want competitive games, and it's more about we want to only have these teams that we deem appropriate to be in the playoff. But it's just interesting to me that the voices that keep calling for that seem to only have a very small defined number of teams and programs for whom deserve to be there, and everybody else should just stand on the sideline. And we're just not in that era of college football anymore. I made a post about this on X yesterday. Think about what's occurred over the course of the last 3 months in college football, where you've got Kurt Cignetti staying at Indiana when he could have written a number onto a check and gone to Penn State, or he could have left for Michigan. Kenny Dillingham decides to stay at Arizona State when he could have taken the Michigan job.
Yeah.
The BYU coach stays in Provo rather than going to Penn State. Texas Tech is a top 4 seed with a bye in the college football playoff. Indiana's the number 1 seed. There's a level of parity and a level of spreading out of college football ability that is pretty remarkable. And rather than looking at that and saying, oh, wow, we have a lot greater parity in college football, this is great, the response has been, well, we should only have this smaller number of teams in the playoff, only the ones that truly deserve it. But as you point out, the regular season that everybody wants to hold up as being the great arbiter of who deserves to be in the playoff doesn't even give you an accurate representation of who deserves to be in the playoff, because half the good teams don't play the other half of the good teams. It's so individualized by what your conference schedule looks like, by who you happen to schedule in the non-conference, by what happened to the teams that you played and whether they were different from week 1 to week 8 or week 9. It's this idea that you can use the regular season to decide these things is such an outdated mentality. And it's the same people who keep pushing this idea that, well, there's only like 8 or 9 brands that should be competing for the national title every year, and everybody else should just go home and shut up. It's bad for the sport. And it makes me wonder how many of these folks actually enjoy watching college football, because they just seem to enjoy watching helmets, engage with other helmets, and that's it.
Yeah, and if you think about, like, now, I don't want to pick on A&M, but I'm going to pick on them here, right? We've talked all year about their schedule, right? If you watch that game, do you think they were better than, well, they lost to Texas, but do you think they're better than some of those SEC teams that were in the top level? Probably not. The schedule just broke for me. Like you said, like, we're holding the regular season up, and it's still a really important regular season because you can only lose 1, maybe 2 games to make the playoff, right? Yeah. And we saw Alabama lose 3 this year. So it still does matter, but it is all schedule dependent. And this happens in college. It's happened to college basketball for a long time, right? Or not a long time, but more recently, right? You have these bloated schedules. So that's not going to change. We don't have these 12-team conferences anymore. And I want to make another point too. Like, all these, the JMUs, the Tulanes, the USFs, Memphis, all their coaches went to Power 4 schools this year. So You're telling me those teams don't matter, but you want their coach, right? They're all got the big boy jobs. Are all of them going to work out? Probably not. But that's where you're finding the next generation of coaches. You're not finding them, as we talked about in an earlier pod. A lot of sitting head coaches were the ones that were hired this cycle. They want that experience, and the only way you're going to get that experience is at that level, to coach at that level and move up. So it's disingenuous to say these programs don't matter when they're the most important part of the fulcrum of the Power 4, because Indiana took 13 JMU players, right, or whatever it happened to be, right? And other schools have done the same thing to build their rosters. Like, it's really a new system, and we got to start being better about it and really respecting these teams more, because they deserve more of the accolades and not this criticism of them being in this tournament.
In an era where repetition and the number of snaps you take as a player matters, the group of 5 teams are a great ground for players that were under-regarded coming out of high school to develop into good players. And yes, some of them end up going and getting deals at power conference schools, but many of them are playing at a level where they can showcase themselves if they get to the playoff. And look, there's no question that there are physical differences. There's physical differences between the bottom of Power 4 and the top of Power 4, just like there's even greater physical differences in most cases between the top of Power 4 and the top of the group of 6 teams. I guess we got to call, is it 5 or 6? I've heard both.
It's going to be 6 here, I guess, with the Pac-12 coming back.
But again, this idea that it's just automatic that, well, we don't let them in, we don't have them play the games. I just don't think we're at that point yet. And again, if we have a situation where all the Power 4 versus Power 4 playoff games are really close and competitive, that's one thing. But that's not how it works. And you go back and you look at the results that we've had over the course of time. I mean, Georgia beat TCU 65-7. LSU beat Oklahoma 63-28. Clemson beat Alabama 44-16 in a game. Clemson beat Notre Dame 30-3 in a game. There have been so many blowouts. Alabama beat Michigan State 38-0. There have been so many blowouts over the course of just the college football playoff era. The arguments ring hollow because it's really then not about wanting competitiveness. It's just about what brands you want in.
Yeah.
And everybody knew what this system was going in. And as you said, if the ACC just has a halfway reasonable tiebreaker, we're not even having this conversation in the first place. So my message, leave the group of 5 alone.
Leave them alone. And let's see how this sport has evolved now, right? We went from a 2-team playoff to a 4-team playoff when really the 4 teams, there was probably only like 2, sometimes 3 teams that were actually good in that play that could win the championship. We're at a year, we have 8 teams left. Can any of those teams not win the national championship? There's probably 2 teams that are probably unlikely, but there's 6 that have an opportunity, I would say, out of this last group of 8, where I don't think in the last 20 years, we haven't had 6 teams at this point of the season. We're like, yes, there's 6 teams that are good enough to win the national championship. The sport is flattening out. It's a good thing for the sport. We'll see some of it at the G5 level. And we'll get to a playoff eventually where not every game's going to be competitive, but we'll have maybe 10, 12, and we're going to go to a 16-team playoff at some point. That you're going to have a more leveling of who can win the whole thing.
Let's talk coaching search real quick. Whether or not Kenny Dillingham was actually offered the Michigan job or not. This is always my favorite thing. I've got Michigan fans in my replies saying, well, he was never actually offered the Michigan job. Keep in mind, no one's actually ever offered a job in college football unless they take it, and then they were offered the job. We're not getting an announcement about Kenny Dillingham signing a new contract and getting new resources if there's not somebody trying to hire him. And last I checked, there weren't a lot of other programs currently looking for head coaches at that level. So right. Michigan now finds themselves in a spot where they are where do they go? We were talking about this on text yesterday. Yeah. They're in a really strange spot right now. Obviously, they didn't plan on firing Sharon Moore. They had to. And now they find themselves in this interesting spot where it's not just, oh, we need to hire a new coach, but we've got to take some morals into account because of the way that they had to handle the Sharon Moore firing. So what's your read on this situation right now, Matt?
I thought for sure it was Dillingham, right? After DeBoer won on Friday night, because DeBoer was going to be the prime guy, but he's now playing through January 1st. It would seem unlikely at this point. And then when Dillingham signs the contract yesterday, asked for $20 million from a big donor, which is just great. I love Dillingham. I love listening to him.
Great.
I honestly don't know. You said Brian Kelly in a text. I said Rich Rod jokingly. I mean, I don't know where we're at this point. I thought Minter might be a guy, but he's on the Harbaugh staff. Are they going to try to break from that whole group? And I know Minter's got a show cause for the next 3 months, but that's now at an injunction level with Jeremy Pruitt. So who knows? I honestly could not tell you. Are they going to go NFL at this point, or is there a coordinator out there that they're going to look at to take this job? If I had an answer, I honestly don't know. I really thought it was going to be Dillingham.
You look at the list of the top coaches in college football, and you just kind of go down the list. Like, well, who would leave that would be a reasonable candidate for Michigan? Well, Ryan Day's not leaving Ohio State. Kurt Cignetti's not leaving Indiana. McGuire's not leaving. Is it McGuire at Texas Tech?
Yeah.
Not leaving Texas Tech. Dan Lanning's not leaving Oregon, at least not for Michigan.
Right.
Kirby's not leaving Georgia. Marcus Freeman might leave Notre Dame, but not to go to Michigan.
Yeah.
You're not hiring the Ole Miss coach. Now, Mike Elko, I could see potentially being interested. He's not from the South initially.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, well, what are you like? Can you hire Mike Elko if you're Michigan? Is that a good enough coach? Obviously, A&M had a good season, but maybe not as good as it looked. at first glance based upon the schedule and the performance here at the end of the year. So maybe you put a pin in that one, but then you keep going down the list. Like Cristobal's not leaving his alma mater to go to Michigan. Kyle Whittingham is an interesting one in that he's retired and apparently would like the job, but that feels like exactly the wrong kind of hire for Michigan for any kind of long-term reestablishment of that program. And you just keep going down the list. I'm hearing Clark Lee's name again coming out of Vanderbilt, and it's kind of a similar thing with Elko, where it's like, it feels like with Michigan, you shouldn't have to do a roll of the dice hire. You should be able to hire a sure thing. I'm not really certain they're going to be able to do that. And when you think about how uneven Michigan's century of football has actually been, outside of that national championship, which feels more out of the blue than not when you look at the rest of what's gone on with that program, they've had a century that's kind of like Nebraska's so far, where they really have been a lot less dominant than most people would think just by the brand name.
Do you get down to a Manny Diaz at this point? He won the conference. I think he did get some looks at Penn State. So would that be a guy? Maybe. I mean, we're running out of names. Or I'm just kind of thinking here, if Clemson and Dabo Swinney are done, would that be something they would like? Because he has this high moral code and all these different things. And would that be someone that would be interested, or if there was some sort of parting of ways? Or I'm just throwing a name out there.
But then if you're Michigan. And just to clarify, when I say out of the blue, I mean the championship that Michigan won was it's out of character with the rest of what they've done over the course of the 21st century, and they look like they're headed in the wrong direction right now. The problem with the Dabo Swinney, first of all, that would break the brains collectively of the entire college football establishment.
Let's do it. Let's break them.
I'm all for it, but is that the kind of coach you want if you're Michigan? A guy who has resisted NIL, has resisted the transfer portal, does not seem to be quite in step with where things are at right now. His Clemson team next year is not likely to be a contending team for the national title. And this Michigan team is going to need some roster reconstruction given, this entire influx and outflux of players and what it looks like for Michigan now against the top teams that are in the Big Ten, essentially. And weirdly, you've got Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon, who all look pretty consistent. You've got USC kind of nipping at everybody's heels and maybe trying to force their way into the conversation. And Michigan was solidly behind those teams, all four of them this year. So they've got a lot of makeup that they have to do. And I don't know if someone like Dabo would be even capable of doing that, because he's been running from the front for so long now at Clemson. You almost need someone that you feel like can do a rebuild that really understands the environment that you got right now. There just aren't a lot of coaches like that at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if you go past the top 12, what you just did there, they're all settled. They already have their coach, and so that's probably where Michigan would look. So, is there maybe Lincoln Riley outside? I know he's
got a $95 million buyout. So USC can't fire. Maybe there's a spring mechanism. But again, if you're Michigan, what have you seen from Lincoln Riley other than, people point to USC having the top recruiting class in college football? Well, they spent almost $10 million on it. And
they haven't played a game yet, right?
And a lot of the players that were in a highly regarded recruiting class last year are in the portal right now for USC. So I don't know if they've really figured anything out. And let's be frank, 9-3 at USC is not an accomplishment. That should be your baseline, given the historical aspects of that program. But again, Eli Drinkowitz is another name you hear pop up.
Yeah.
James Fish, for whatever reason, apparently does not appear to be in the mix anymore for this Michigan job, which is fascinating. And then a lot of the coaches that you might have looked at and said, those are the top G5s, we're going to go grab one of those because that's where the next wave's coming from. They missed them all.
They're all gone, yeah.
They're all gone. I mean, Chesney's going to UCLA, Galesh going to Auburn. What's the name of the North Texas coach? I've forgotten already.
Morris. No, Morris is the other guy, right? Is Morris the guy?
But he's off to Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot of clear options. So maybe the coordinator route is the right one, but that's dangerous in and of itself, because everything I said about Swinney and his inability, or perhaps inability, to navigate the current waters of college sports goes double for an NFL coordinator. What NFL coordinator is going to come in and understand how to scout talent at the G5 level or at the lower levels of Power 4, how to bring in transfers, how to manage a roster? Bill Belichick and his crew were supposed to come in and revolutionize college football. They got humbled by it instead this year. Like that's not a logical route for a school like Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, or I guess there's an option where you have a gap. I mean, it's a gap year thing now because it's where the search is. Do you keep Biff on for the year and roll the dice and wait for next hiring cycle at this point? That has to be an option, right, to think about. If you don't find someone out there that you actually want, I mean, does it hurt recruiting? It's going to hurt recruiting unless people are going to school for him, which I doubt. But there's got to probably be some discussion with that at this point. If you're striking out on all these guys, which everybody's striking out on these guys this year because everyone keeps re-upping with the school they're at, or they're just not leaving. All, like you said, all the G5 guys are gone already. So the pool, as we've kind of talked through this, the pool is really thin unless something drastic happens, which I just don't see at this point. They're going to have to go the coordinator route, and that's probably not what your Michigan fans are going to want to hear. But that's where they're kind of at this point.
It'll be a fascinating thread as we move through. This upcoming week is Christmas, which a lot of people in this country celebrate. Are you going to see a ton of movement in terms of the Michigan job? Well, of course, I say that, and it's Sunday the 21st at 9:50 in the morning. Something might be announced 10 minutes after we do the recording on this. But I'm increasingly curious about how long this is going to take. Because the meta idea going into this weekend was that they were waiting to see if Kalen DeBoer lost to Oklahoma. He did not. And then if that didn't happen, they would go the Dillingham route. That's not happening. And so much curiosity about where Michigan does all this.
Right. And I mean, and like what coordinators are left? Are you going to look? I mean, both IU coordinators just re-upped now that if it's Michigan, they could call them. Would they leave?
I mean, they would. But again, if you're Michigan, you can't just hire a coordinator who doesn't have head coaching experience coming off of a situation where you hired a coordinator that didn't have head coaching experience. And this was something I mentioned on one of our subscriber videos on Crimson Cast. It's not just the X's and O's. It's how does one conduct oneself? What's your behavior? How do you interact with others? Michigan, of all teams right now, is not in a position where they can take a risk on somebody that isn't a proven commodity from an operations perspective and from a behavioral perspective. And so I think even if you wanted to hire one of Indiana's coordinators or wanted to hire, well, you can't hire Ohio State's coordinators. You're not hiring Matt Patricia in Ann Arbor, of all places, given his background with the Lions. And you're not hiring their offensive coordinator because he just took the South Florida job. And then you start going down the list. Oregon's coordinators are gone. I'm not sure about Georgia's coordinators, but that doesn't seem like a logical hire for a school like Michigan. So their timing for Michigan is just not great.
It's great.
Yeah, it's great for the rest of us. It's great. Anyway, okay, let's talk quickly about the matchups that we've got. We'll obviously have a lot more to talk about with this later on this week as we get ready. But 4 games. First game going to be December 31st in Arlington, Texas, as Ohio State and Miami will be facing off against one another. This is a matchup of 2 teams that are separated, but statistically speaking, maybe not quite as separated as one might think. If you go by S&P Plus, Ohio State is the top team in the country. They're number 1, 31.6 rating. Miami's a 21.9. That equates out to about a 10-point spread. If you want to look at FPI, they're a little bit closer to each other in that, let me call FPI up here real quick. Ohio State second in FPI at 28.3. Miami is 7th in FPI at 20.9. So about a touchdown difference there in terms of overall projection on a neutral field. Miami does not have as good of an offense as Ohio State has, but they have a commensurate defense, and they have better special teams, as we saw on and off in that game versus A&M, mostly off. Ohio State will be the clear favorite in this game. They should be the clear favorite in this game. I think it would be a mistake to say that Miami has no chance in this game, but I will say if Miami, as I mentioned earlier, plays like they played against A&M, they will have no chance in this game. How do you read this one?
Yeah, that's my initial read would be Ohio State dominating this game just based on how Miami played. With that said, Ohio State has had time off. We saw this last year. All 4 bye teams lost. I don't expect that to happen this year like it did last year. But certainly there is that, hey, we've had a month off. They get the rust off. You said Signetti said that 3.5 weeks from when they played a couple weeks ago. I'm curious how they come out after their first loss or their first real tough game of the year. Ohio State, we haven't seen them. That was the first time they got punched in the mouth all year. The offensive line got dominated a little bit. They didn't run the ball fantastically. So there is this opportunity where it's going to be, you're right, a really low-scoring game. And so can Miami do enough to actually keep up with Ohio State scoring points? I think, was the stat last week, Ohio State has not given up 17 points in a game this year yet. So, right, so your path to victory is keeping within the margins here. It's going to be a low-scoring game. That's the only way you can probably beat Ohio State. Because if it gets out of hand, you're going to be in trouble. They just don't give up points, and their defense is really good, right? So it does feel like the spread feels right around the 10 points, and FPI is showing that as well. I am just, you have this recency bias of what you saw yesterday, and you just, how is Miami going to even compete? But they're going to play better than you would think they played yesterday. So I think it'll be a closer game than what people maybe think at this point, and we'll have some more time to talk about this maybe next week as we get more into it. But I'm curious how Miami comes out after winning on a road, which is a really tough. And this will be a neutral site game, so that's pretty big too.
Ohio State, when they've struggled defensively, and I use that term loosely, it's been because the opposition has been able to throw the ball. Again, Indiana, 222 yards and a touchdown through the air. Illinois, the other game where they allowed they allowed 14 points against Penn State. They actually threw the ball around a little bit, but really Illinois with Luke Altmaier, which may be the best comp I can think of in terms of what Miami's offense can be. They threw the ball for 248 yards against Ohio State. They just committed a bunch of turnovers, and Ohio State essentially was never in danger in that game, but Illinois didn't play particularly good defense in that game either. And so the really, it's hard to run on Ohio State. Indiana was able to run on Ohio State enough that it opened up their passing game. That's the route for Miami, is they have to kind of replicate that, and they've got to get pressure on Julian Sand. They've got to disrupt him in the pocket, and they've got to have great play out of their secondary to try to neutralize Smith and Tate. It's a tall task. Only one team's been able to do it. Interestingly enough, of course, Brian Haynes, the architect of IU's defense, the defensive coordinator for Curt Cignetti, Ryan Day and Ohio State going to be taking on the former defensive coordinator for Curt Cignetti, who is currently the defensive coordinator for Miami. It's an interesting little subplot. They play differently, but they both really focus on havoc and getting disruption up front. Again, though, I would still expect Ohio State to win this one probably by somewhere between 10 and 14 points, simply because I don't trust Miami, as we've talked about literally all year. They do play well in big games sometimes, but not enough that you could bank on them to play. But I am curious how the neutral site affects this. There'll be a ton of Buckeyes there, but there'll be a lot of Miami fans in Jerry World as well. So should be an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it's, it'll be a fun game. I think, I'm always curious, and I said this right off the top, how the layoff affects these teams, and that's your opportunity early to get some quick points on the board since you played the most, you just played, so you have a little bit more momentum. Carson Beck just really concerns me. We haven't really seen that guy that was kind of carrying him early in the year. If you remember the first month, everyone was talking about him for Heisman, right? And then he had those couple of games against Louisville and then SMU, and he's not been consistent really at all this season, and that worries me against a defense like Ohio State.
Let's go to the first game on New Year's Day happening at Hard Rock Stadium. The Orange Bowl, two classic Orange Bowl competitors, Oregon and Texas Tech. The Ducks, a 1.5-point favorite in the early betting against Texas Tech. Tough one to read, largely because we just don't know how good Texas Tech is. They were incredibly dominant in the Big 12. They beat BYU twice, who we think was good, but we're not totally sure. They beat Utah. They have the one loss, but they didn't have their starting quarterback in that game. They play an Oregon team that is incredibly hard to stop offensively, and really only one team's been able to do it so far this year. But Texas Tech is the best defensive team in the country. If you look at the efficiencies, they've really stifled everybody they've played. It's going to be a game that is probably the hardest of these 4 games for me to accurately predict, simply because I have no idea what we're going to get out of Texas Tech on this stage.
It's the best front 7 in the country. Texas Tech playing a really good team that likes to spread you out, can score. We saw how they can score quickly. That's how they've been under Dan Lanning since he's been there. And Texas Tech offensively is not very good, right? They're average. They've won these games. They pulled away. They force turnovers. They get sacks. That's the type of game they're probably going to have to play.
Yeah,
to beat this Oregon team. I'm curious if this line doesn't move a little bit to maybe the 2.5, 3 points in favor of Oregon. It just seems like, the way they play, people will be a lot more money will go on Oregon. However, Texas Tech is really good, and you're right. We're going to get a really good glimpse of how well this team was built against a really good Big Ten team here that has definitely hit their stride the last month. They have had to win some tough games. They had to win that tough Iowa game. They had to beat USC at home, and now they just blew out JMU. I feel like they are a team that you don't really want to play right now. They're going to be a really tough out, and they're going to have to keep this from them running all over them and keeping them in the box if they're going to have an opportunity to win this game.
It's really interesting when you look at the statistical elements, how these teams compare with each other. If you look at efficiencies in FPI, everything you said is true. Texas Tech 22nd in offense, but first in defense. Oregon 4th in offense, 5th in defense. Texas Tech really good in special teams. Oregon pretty inconsistent. But then if you look at S&P Plus, Texas Tech looks really good across the board on offense and defense, and it's actually Oregon's offense that lags a little bit behind. So I don't exactly know how those things clash with one another. Oregon has not seen a team like Texas Tech so far this year, but Texas Tech has not seen a team like Oregon so far this year. And so, look, this is probably the game that will be I'm not going to say the most fun, because I think that's probably the next game that we're talking about, but this game has the potential to be the most surprising either way. And I believe Oregon's probably going to win this game. I think they're one of the 3 best teams in the country at this point. The other 2 also being from the Big Ten. It's a game that Oregon is desperate to win because I think they've got a bad taste in their mouth from last year. I just have no idea with Texas Tech, as I've said. So we'll see what happens with that. Let's go. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. To say it's a nice start to your new year with this being the first game of the year.
Yeah,
right? You wake up and you turn on Texas Tech, Oregon. You can't beat that.
And hey, I just think it's great you've got Texas Tech in this game. That's another new brand that's in the quarterfinals, taking on what's kind of the most recent nouveau riche team in Oregon, but one that has had enough established presence at the top levels of the sport. It's a nice little battle there between 2 relative newcomers to the tops of college football. Let's go to the Rose Bowl. Speaking of newcomers to the tops of college football, Indiana, a 7-point favorite right now against Alabama. Looking at this, if these 2 teams play at the top of their demonstrated abilities so far throughout this year, Indiana will win the game. They have demonstrated that they're better on offense and better on defense statistically against a schedule that, according to all of the power rankings, is certainly has better top-end competition than what Alabama has faced so far throughout the course of the year. Alabama's probably had more depth to what they've done schedule-wise. The key here feels like can Alabama get diversity on offense to where they're not relying entirely on Ty Simpson? And then can Indiana essentially do the same on offense and consistently move the ball and score points? Indiana's benefited a lot from turnovers throughout the course of the year. Can't really count on those in those sorts of games. So in their regular offense, can they get that combination of pass and run? Can they avoid mistakes that lead to turnovers or lead to bad field position? And can they be consistent throughout 60 minutes against an Alabama team that will certainly out-star rating them in terms of raw innate physical talent, can Indiana use their what up to this point has been superior coordination as a team to get things done over the course of 60 minutes?
It's the most well-coached team versus the team that probably has maybe the most talent outside of Georgia, really. Composite ratings, how they rank all those things. We just haven't seen that out of Alabama consistently, right? It took being down 17-0 against Oklahoma to really shine. They went 3 and out the first 3 drives, and they looked like they were dead in the water. And they finally turned around. They really, if you look at those stats, they only had 260-some yards, and most of them were, as we said earlier, were passing. So, and you mentioned this earlier, like, I don't think you can beat Indiana running the way they are. There's just no way that they're going to be able to beat that defense with just being able to throw the ball. And Ty Simpson was putting some nice passes behind him and had some big drops, but he also missed a lot of targets too. So we haven't just seen that consistent Alabama team. For Indiana, it's, if they're consistent, they should win this game playing how they played all year. Their offense, timing wise, that's my concern, just having the time off for them. It's for all these teams with the extra week, couple weeks off, just because it's, you're in such a repetition playing. Now they had the late bye, so that may help them a little bit. So they're a little more fresh, they're a little more ready to go. I do like that. They're coming off this Ohio State win. They played really well. Mendoza is playing really well. The running game. I mean, everything points to Indiana winning this game. It's going to be close, I think. But I don't think it's going to be as high scoring as people would think. I think it might be like a 24-17 type game.
Yeah, the over-under on this is 48.5, which is the second lowest of the 4 games that we've got. Only Miami, Ohio State is rated lower, and that's a full touchdown lower.
And I was curious too, Alabama fans and we're pretty out on this team. Not that it's going to play a big factor, but everybody I've talked to that lives here in Bloomington is going to this game.
Right.
I'm the only one that's not going to this game, it seems like. So
I'm still working on that, by the way, to get him out to this game.
Yeah. So, just the amount of ticket, and again, it's a neutral site, but I am really curious how many Bama fans are going to actually show up because they've been in these games so many times. Right. Are their fans excited about this as much as Indiana fans? This is their first time out there in such a long time. And in the Rose Bowl, they're gobbling up all the tickets. It might be like a 70-30 Indiana crowd out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting factors that I'm uncertain how they play out. It's also just the concept of Indiana as a brand against Alabama as a brand. These two teams have never played each other, which is an interesting little factor. First meeting, but these two brands clashing, your brain automatically goes to, well, Indiana's the underdog. Indiana's going to have to play a perfect game, and really the shoe's on the other foot with that, but not in your mind. And so that's, I think, key for any neutrals watching this game. But it's also, if you're the favorite, and we saw this last year, as you mentioned, with all of the favorites or at least all of the higher seeded teams in the quarterfinals, you've got to play your best, and sometimes the team that just played has a greater advantage because they've gotten back into the swing of things mentally. So complacency, a big enemy in games like this, but also just the fact you haven't played in Indiana's case in almost a month, when you get into this game, is going to be something that they'll not have faced up to this point in the season, where they've had such a long layoff. You would think it would be helpful. You get healthier. Do you lose sharpness along the way becomes the question mark.
Yeah. And, there's the other subplot is DeBoer and Cignetti, right? Cignetti was at Alabama. DeBoer was at Indiana just 6 years ago. So it's really fun kind of seeing those things. Just seeing the old pictures of them. It's unbelievable just how this is all played out.
Last game and our last segment here, Georgia, a 7-point favorite over Ole Miss. This is the Sugar Bowl. This will be the evening game on New Year's Day. This was a game that happened in the middle of the season as Ole Miss traveled to Athens to take on Georgia, and a lot closer game than people remember it being. Ole Miss was leading in the fourth quarter. Ole Miss had an excellent offensive game. They scored touchdowns on their first 5 drives, and then they just forgot how to move the ball and score, and Georgia ends up coming back and winning the game at home to close things out. This will be a game where Georgia should rightly be favored, and by the same token, Ole Miss is probably not going to be afraid of Georgia going into this game, given that I'm sure they look back on what happened in Athens and say we probably should have won that game if we had just finished the deal.
like I said earlier, if you watch this game, there was no punts to the fourth quarter. So both teams are going up and down the field against each other. This was what, mid-October, I believe this game was. And so I remember watching this thing. And man, Ole Miss looks really impressive. Yeah, they didn't win the game. This is their only loss of the year. But if they were to meet again, it's probably going to be pretty good. Now, things have certainly changed for Ole Miss, new coaching, everything like that. But they certainly feel I'm not saying they're going to win the game, but I think it's going to be a really good game. Just the way Ole Miss came out and played. I know it's Tulane, but they were really moving the ball. The defense looked really good. They've now had that. Now that game's over. Now they can get past that. Hey, Giffin's gone. Go play Georgia, who's had a break. Georgia's, as we've been all year, they've had this. They have a great game against Alabama, and then the game before they struggle. Or it's just been back and forth with them all season. What Georgia are we going to get in the Sugar Bowl this year? And that's my biggest question. We just haven't seen the consistency at that top level that we're used to with Georgia, or their national championship years or previous seasons, even last year. They lost this game. I know they lost. I know it was Stockton's first start. But I'm curious if it's going to be the same game that we got 2 months ago. I'm really curious if we're going to have this up and down type game.
You would think Georgia would have put it together. Everybody seems to be anointing Georgia as the team that's surging at the right time and the team to beat in the college football playoff. People have picked them to beat Ohio State and whoever comes out of the other side of the bracket. They got to win this one first, and I think you overlook Ole Miss at your own peril because we've seen what they can do at Georgia. I'm curious what they can do against Georgia on a neutral field. One that, by the way, is closer to Oxford than it is Athens. I mean, I would imagine Ole Miss fans will be attending in droves for this, as will Georgia fans. It'll be a great environment, the Sugar Bowl. So anyway, we'll be back this upcoming week. We'll have some more content. Hopefully get a couple of folks coming from the press to talk through things. Matt, as always, a pleasure. As it's college football playoff season, things winding down. Only a few games left in the college football season, but a lot to talk about.
Enjoy your holiday this week, folks. We'll catch you next week before we start back up.
For Matt Blaszka, I'm Galen Clavio. This is Football Weather. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.